I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
And I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff.
Folks, it's not Christmas yet. Don't get too excited. Santa Claus, he's still at the North Pole. Don Feliciano, he's still in Cuba.
Santa's still peering into his horrible scrying orb, trying to see who's being good and bad, while Don Feliciano is stealing from the rich to give to the poor.
Man, Don Feliciano rules so much. I wanted to avoid getting excited about Christmas before it's time, but now I've said Don Feliciano, and I'm just really excited about the anti-capitalist Christmas man.
We should back up. Okay, if you've never heard of Don Feliciano, maybe you're a new listener to this podcast. And
coming in hot.
Yeah, coming in hot for sure. Don Feliciano, this is going to be a great way to eat up some time in this episode, by the way, so I'm going to take it. Don Feliciano is a very interesting part of Cuba's history with Christmas. We did an episode on Cuba and Christmas a long time ago. There's a really kind of funny story about Fidel Castro banning Santa Claus as like a symbol of imperialism in Cuba. And instead, the Cuban government invented this character, Don Feliciano, who's like a Cuban peasant who brings you a present instead of Santa Claus. And it is the coolest thing ever. So Don Feliciano, I don't have kids, but one day I will. And Don Feliciano will be the one to bring them exactly one present.
Yeah, pretty good. He looks kind of like Santa Claus, but he has like a Hawaiian shirt on, I think.
Yeah. We need a Don Feliciano sort of localized to our own times, like maybe he has a skateboard and a wallet chain or something.
That's right.
A little bit different.
Oh, Donald Feliciano, the Zoomer Santa? Yeah.
Donnie Feliciani? Yeah, for sure.
Donnie Feliciani sounds like my new favorite SNL cast member. I'm super psyched whenever he gets to be on the show.
Yeah. Crazy they got him off of YouTube. Okay, so that's Don Feliciano. He's great. Matt, it's Advent. It's the Advent time. What are you guys doing in your household right now to prepare for the coming of our good Lord Jesus Christ?
Well, right now we've nearly burned it down at least one time. So let me tell you this is great. Another story to eat up time from our podcast to stave off talking about something serious. So let's see. Like all good Episcopal churches, our church has a children's service every now and again. And the most recent one, they handed out these like kits to make your own Advent candles at home. And we did, and we made the candles, and it was a pretty fun craft. And my son was really into it. Honestly, I was too. It was great. But we did light one of the candles, and we must have I don't know. We had some kind of candle malfunction, and then like a big chunk of the candle did fall off on the table, and it was still on fire. It melted a bit of the plastic Christmas wreath that was around the edges. It's it's fine. It's still going to be great.
Yeah,
but we
have
our first Advent candle, the Advent Candle of Hope. It is significantly smaller than the rest now, and it's going to be a Christmas miracle if it makes it all the way up into the 25th. But we'll see.
That feels appropriate, though. That's the hope. It's very important. You hope that it makes it all the way through.
That's right.
Man, this is not an Advent story, but what you were just saying reminded me of it. So, Midnight Mass, we've all been there. Maybe you haven't. In Midnight Mass, it's really late.
Your priest is a vampire?
Yeah, your priest is a vampire, exactly. But in addition, everybody there at midnight mass is sleepy, tired, and you're ready for whatever it might be, Christmas or Easter. And they distribute candles, and you light them, and they turn off all the lights in church. And so you know, it's this beautiful little moment, and everything is candlelit, so on and so forth. So, as you might guess, though, like the candles are lit for kind of a while, and everybody is super sleepy. And I think my whole life I thought, I can't believe that like none of these ever catch fire. And I did go to church with an older friend of mine who I won't name on this podcast. He doesn't listen to it, but whatever, for his own decency's sake, just in case. Anyway, we went with this friend, and he did fall asleep holding the candle, and the little guard did finally catch fire. And I felt like this was the moment I'd been waiting for my whole life, like seeing it happen, and not only like being aware it was in church, but it was like my group. I felt so proud. It was really exciting. So we'll see. We'll see if that happens at Midnight Mass this year. I'm hoping.
The most exciting time anyone's ever had at church, for sure.
All right. Let's see. We are talking about Advent. You know, Matt and I were like, what are we going to do today and next week and the week after and the week after that, like we always do. And sometimes it's a struggle to come up with content. And all of a sudden it dawned on us, wait a second, Advent has 4 themes, one every week. Why don't we just do that? And guess what? That is exactly what we're doing. It is Hope this week. We're going to talk about hope. We're going to talk about it using the tools we usually use. I don't know. Hope is a weird conversation, specifically in both Christianity and on the left. So maybe that'll be fun. We'll find out. Matt, before we get there, do you want to say anything about our Patreon at the top of the episode here?
Absolutely, I do. If you like our podcast, and you probably do, you could support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Magnificast. You can support us at any number of levels, and there are a few rewards that you get for doing so. Like you get a special behind the scenes podcast, which I'm just remembering I never did it this week. Well, all right, you will get it eventually. And you can get a sticker and an invite to our Discord channel, which is always popping off, doing different things. So you could be a part of the Magnificast community if you just want to subscribe to our Patreon. So that's what you can do. I don't know. Give it to somebody as a gift. That'd be a weird gift, but you could.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to get it, I have to say. Let's see, though. Yeah, that's great. You can support us there if you want to, or you can just keep listening to this episode and don't feel guilty about it.
For free.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would prefer that you don't. This is an episode about hope, as I was just saying, and I mentioned that hope is a complicated topic for Christians and the left. Matt, I'm going to make you answer this question. Why is that the case? Why is hope a complicated issue for both of these discursive families?
I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons that hope ends up being problematic. I mean, there's a certain idealism to hope that probably makes it problematic for Marxism. And maybe I think like if we consider it pretty seriously, like we are going to in this episode, I think that idealism is a little bit misattributed, because I don't think hope is actually all that idealistic. But you know, it has that connotation perhaps. And for Christianity, hope is a big deal though, right? Because you're always hoping for you know, the eschaton. You're hoping for Jesus to come back and suck you up right off this bad earth and put you in heaven or something. You know, which leads to all kinds of very complicated ideas and theologies and anxieties. The other thing too, I think about hope is that it is one of those words I think has lost most of its meaning because of like consumer culture. This feels like such a 1990s thing to like really care about, or like a very Charlie Brown Christmas thing to care about. It's just hope has become too commercial. But I mean, I don't know, myself, whenever I think of the word hope or I hear it in a religious context or something, I think of one of those like very chuggy wall signs that say like hope and live, laugh, love, or whatever. You know, it's like one of those words that I guess sounds kind of nice and probably has something to it, but you know, it's been so thoroughly appropriated into consumer culture, it makes me want to barf whenever I think about it too much. And I think that sucks though, because I think if you do think about it, as a political idea rather than like a chuggy wall sign, or as a religious idea rather than a chuggy wall sign, I think there's something to hope that is actually really compelling. That is worth considering.
Hmm.
Dean, what do you think?
I think you're right. Everything you're saying is right. So you can take comfort in that. But no, I agree. Hope is a really weird thing. I remember one time, I don't remember what we were talking about, but I was talking with my wife, Emily, about something. And I think it was like related to some potential political possibility of the US or whatever. And she was like, "Look, I know that you don't like have much hope in anything, but you have to like think about this. It might be cool and like allow yourself to feel cool." So that's a brand that I cultivated over time for
Mm.
the worse, I think, as a reputation. I don't recommend becoming that person. But nevertheless, there I was. And I think that the reason that I sort of gained that reputation is hope can be the kind of thing that not only is taken over by consumerism, but it can feel like it's cheap or easy, or it's a way out of dealing with the bitter reality around you, or like
Right.
if you get lost in hopes, you end up disappointed, right? It's a recipe for cynicism and disappointment and naivete, and all that stuff is true. Like, it's true. Hope will potentially mess you up and bum you out for sure. But at the same time, it's kind of like a risk that is indispensable in some ways. And this is kind of a grad school hot take. There's a lot of conversation around hope in certain very cool literature right now. Lots of interesting stuff happening in like political left stuff and Black studies stuff and Afro-pessimism and everything around hope, and it's all very good. And we're not going to get into the weeds with it, I guess. But I kind of am of the hot take, the opinion that you're kind of like stuck with hope whether you like it or not. Although sometimes we name it different things or we prefer to use different terms for it. And I guess for me, it just comes down to like, well, let's figure out the kind of hope that is worth talking about, and we'll see what we can do with that. I think that's the way that I came around to hopefully not being as crabby and annoying to be around, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I can resonate with that a lot. At a certain point, I think like if you are reading, radical texts in grad school or whatever, and you're not doing like organizing work and you're not really seeing that like you actually do have agency in the world, I think that like cynicism becomes extremely I don't know, it feels good in some ways. It presses some good buttons for you, like as an affect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that man, it's a good idea to push that feeling away. Being a cynic, being a big downer, it's not great. It's not great for you, and it's probably not a great idea to think about the world if you actually want to change it.
Yeah.
Well, here's an idea. This is an idea about hope that I think I have thought about quite a bit. Um, my friend of the show, John Birmingham, I don't know if he listens still, who knows? But anyways, he often used to teach a college class where he made undergrads read Cornel West's book Hope on a Tightrope, and I had never read the book. And one time he asked me if I could like sub in for him because he was going to go to a conference, and I had to read the book very quickly and kind of figure out what it was about so he could talk to some undergrads about it. Anyways, it's not my favorite Cornel West book, but it's certainly a Cornel West book, and there's a great quote in there that I think he's kind of famous for at this point. So I'll just read it, and we can kind of go from there.
Hmm.
Cornel West, everyone's favorite guy. He's what a great person, honestly. Cornel West says, "I'm in no way optimistic, but I remain a prisoner of hope. Hope is no guarantee. Real hope is grounded in a particular messy struggle, and it can be betrayed by naive projections of a better future that ignore the necessity of doing the real work." So what we're talking about is hope on a tightrope. I mean, the idea here is pretty interesting. You have something like optimism, the feeling that like, I don't know, you're a glass half full kind of person. Things are going to turn out okay, like whatever. The universe is going to kind of sway things in your favor or whatever. God's looking out over your shoulder. I don't know, one of those ways. But in all of those, in optimism, the future's guaranteed. Things will just work out. There's nothing you have to really do. Things will be fine. But hope is a different sort of comportment towards the world, a different type of like carrying yourself and interacting with how you see yourself in the world.
Hmm.
It's you know that like uh if you hope for something, you have to be like willing to imagine that like that hope is possible, but you also know that like you have to like do it, right?
Hmm.
Like you're hoping this thing works out, or you're hoping that like your efforts are enough, is like already a claim that bases a certain amount of agency in you and in the action of other people around you. So it's you can imagine a better future, right? You can think that another world is possible, but that still doesn't mean that you have hope, because hope necessitates that you're actually doing something, that you're struggling towards the better world in a real concrete way.
Yeah, I think that is important to think about. I guess where we locate hope, or where does hope get nourished, or something. I think like when I think back to being like an evangelical teen, if somebody asked me if I had hope, I would have said yes, and if they said sort of in what or from where, I would have said, I don't know, like the my relationship with Christ in this kind of vague sense. Some idea about like the afterlife and so on and so forth, but it would all have been totally imaginary, right? Like hope would
Right.
be the kind of thing that is rooted in some kind of future world that my mind could project. But now I would still say that I have a lot of hope, but it comes out of, I guess, as Cornel West puts it, that messy struggle. But we could say solidarity, or the hope that you not only need to kind of sustain people's movements, but also the hope that I think sort of just emerges out of those movements too. Like,
Hmm.
there's a lot of defeats in people's movements, and that is hard to take. But like, you do get a win every once in a while, and sometimes you even get like a really big win. And I think it's also okay and important to sort of allow those victories to create a feeling of hope, because you want to keep the ball rolling. And also, where people do get power and have kind of created alternatives in the world, they do that by continuing to build on those victories, right? Not constantly poo-pooing them, or like being too afraid to get into it, but by instead like risking the hope that you have to kind of step out and like give something a try, even if you're gonna mess it up as you whatever build the new movement towards socialism, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. Well, let me drive this a little bit more with some other stuff from Cornell West. Again, I don't know. I feel I don't feel we don't talk a lot about Cornell West on the podcast, but maybe we should. At least when it comes to hope, he's like the guy that talks about it the most, I think. Um okay, so Cornel West in this it's he was interviewed on this Vox podcast, and I listened to a bit of it just to see like what he was saying about hope, and it was pretty interesting. So the podcast host was trying to get him to differentiate optimism from hope. Another something that seems like a sticking point for me in my brain, at least, because they seem in the way that people use them, they seem sort of synonymous, but I think in practice they're not. So Cornel West kind of goes on to say this thing that like, he can't be an optimist because like he sees the world around him and it's like very bad, right?
Mhm.
Like you how could you be an optimist in a world where like, I don't know, white supremacy is still like the like the mode of operation for the entire like, I don't know, North American governments? How could you be optimistic in like the face of, so many awful things that are happening, right? Genocide and whatnot. It's all bad. But he says that hope is something that's not like that. Hope is different. It's participatory, he says. So Cornel West says this: you're already in the mess. You're in the funk. What are you going to do there? Hope is a verb as much as a virtue. Hope is as much a consequence of your action as it is a source of your action. As Roberto Unger always said, so that hope is something that you find in your immersion, and you decide that you're going to fight till the end, no matter what. I think that's a really interesting formulation of this idea, though, and maybe one that even muddies the water a bit more. It is a as much a consequence of your action as it is a source of your action.
Mhm.
I think it's a complicated way to put it, and maybe it makes it harder even to parse out. But I think that's a really interesting way to put it, though, because it's not just like an outcome that you're suspecting might follow. but it's the thing that's making you seek the outcome in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's the motivation, but it's also the thing that you want to do. It's it's like it's the trying to think of like a good analog or maybe like another word that you could like attach to it, but it's like hope is the feeling of empowerment that you get like when you are actually doing like that work or something. It's
Mm-hmm.
like when you're feeling like you could actually win, like the hope is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have to be able to sort of risk that potential disappointment, in order to get anywhere anyway.
It's on a tightrope, I've heard.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't hope, you're also sort of risking that you won't get anywhere either, which is you're risking it either way, I guess. But people on the left, I think, have this strange habit of it, like if it's bad news, it must be true. That's kind of a like an equation that I think comes up in the left a lot. But it's important also to be like, well, sometimes good news is true, and it's good that it is true. Like you want it to be true, and
Mhm.
and in some parts of the world, it's true, right? Like whatever in Bolivia, the movement towards socialism got removed by a coup, and a bunch of people, I'm sure, hoped that it would come back, and guess what it did, right? Like there's something about that matters in a material sense.
It came back, and it wasn't just because like that was the grand, mechanics of the universe for it to come back. It came back because like a lot of people went on strike
Right, right.
and a lot of people fought for it, right? Like so like the hope is there in what they wanted, but that thing that they wanted, the thing that they're striving towards, kind of winning their country back. That's what moved them to action. That's like what empowered them.
Yeah. I think you could probably take a term like hope and, I don't know, parse it out into all kinds of different species or subcategories or something.
Sure.
And I'm sure people have done it and do it or whatever. But I really like actually a particular theologian and the way that he talks about it. Johann Baptiste Metz, who I think I maybe even talked about like 2 episodes ago or something. I guess he's just in my brain. But he is a really interesting German theologian, Catholic theologian. He was like interested in liberation theology as a person in Europe, and wrote a bunch of interesting stuff. Some of it I like and some of it I don't. But in particular, he was really invested in trying to do theology, first of all, kind of in the wake of the Holocaust in his German context. And that's very interesting, but also in dialogue with critical theory and what's called the Frankfurt School, which is kind of a collection of Marxist thinkers who had different things to say about culture and religion, and they were kind of like, I don't know, how would you describe them in a word? They were like weird Marxists, I guess.
Well, they were
depressed Marxists for the most part.
That's right, depressed Marxists. They were Marxists after the revolution wasn't coming imminently.
Yeah, that's right. After the revolution not only wasn't coming, but got completely trounced by fascism.
That's right.
Anyway, Johann Baptiste Metz, he's a Catholic theologian reading those people. So he wrote a really interesting book called Faith in History and Society, which is just kind of his, I don't know, theological vision. And in it, there's this cool passage that I always think about when I think about hope. And I'm going to read it. He says this: "In my definition of the faith of Christians, I spoke of hope in solidarity. Solidarity here should be understood in a strictly universal sense as solidarity that has to justify itself, not only with regard to the living and future generations, but also with regard to the dead. In this hope, then, the Christian does not primarily hope for themselves, they also have to hope for others, and in this hope for themselves. The hope of Christians in a God of the living and dead, and in the power that God, in the power of that God to raise people from the dead, is a hope in a revolution for all human beings, including those who suffer and have suffered unjustly, those who have long been forgotten, and even the dead. This hope does not in any sense paralyze historical initiatives or the struggle for the state of all humans as subjects. On the contrary, it acts as a guarantee for the criteria which humans use again and again to oppose, in the presence of the accumulated sufferings of those who've been unjustly treated, the prevailing unjust structures and relationships." So typical theology language, but I think the short of it here that I really like is he's really trying to pull together, on the one hand, this kind of eschatological vision that Christians have, right? The vision for the afterlife, this vision for a world where everybody's resurrected, where the world is redeemed, and so on. But also like saying you don't sort of have that on the one hand and the material struggle on the other, but rather it's that desire for the redemption of not just future human beings, but even the past, of all sufferings to have been righted. That sort of pushes you into the material struggle as well. And, I think of that as kind of I mentioned these kind of species of hope, or something that you could kind of find. That idea of hope being in solidarity, that hope kind of springs out of solidarity. I think that is like the way of talking about hope that sort of makes the most sense to me. Whatever we want to say about like hope in general or something, it's like I have to tie it to that theme of like solidarity in order to make sense of it at all, whether it's like theology or politics.
Yeah, that's such a compelling idea, though, that I don't know. Sometimes we talk about on this show that the left, has so much to offer Christianity, but that convinces me, I guess, that sometimes the opposite is true. That sometimes Christianity has something to give to other people, especially on the left. That you could have such a grand and radical vision about hope and justice that like even history would be set right. It's a pretty compelling idea. Sucks that more Christians don't believe that, I guess.
Yeah. It's also one that, so Metz gets that also from critical theory, which is really interesting. So we mentioned like the critical theorists are known as being the depressing Marxists. They're writing after the destruction of Marxism, or the failure of it, and so on. But at least as far as they were concerned. But one thing that is really fascinating is like you do, the reputation is well earned. Like if you go read someone like Theodor Adorno, you're going to read a lot of really depressing comments about culture and jazz music. But you'll also read some really interesting sort of ways that Adorno tries to find hope too. And one of those is by casting his own sort of quasi-mystical vision of the future. So like Adorno, he is Jewish, but not practicing by any stretch. He's interested in Christianity, but definitely not a Christian. But he borrows from these traditions in order to sort of think like, in his imagination as a Marxist person, he wants to imagine the world from the standpoint of redemption, as he puts it in a few places. And it's like that imaginative act allows him to sort of think about, politics, or what would it mean to kind of get from point A to point B, from here to that sort of standpoint of redemption. And I think that, the way that gets filtered out in Metz is so cool, because Metz is like, yeah, that is what Christians say, right? That is what we actually believe. We want to think from that standpoint, and we believe that we're going to get there too. But I think it's compelling that even for Adorno, who doesn't believe in that, in a kind of metaphysical way, nevertheless, he does believe it in this kind of political, imaginative way. And that is a very cool gift of, I don't know, religious traditions to leftist traditions.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what's so interesting about Metz's, I guess, interpretation of that, or I don't know if interpretation is the right word, but that particular view of redemption like pushes you in to consider the material, whereas like so many other Christians just like completely get lost with redemption. Like it's like completely eschatological. It's like in the future. I mean, maybe more like Adorno than anything else, right? It's just off in the future. It'll happen. I don't know, but like it's not anything that we really have anything to do with. Which, like, on the one hand, I guess like there's an Orthodox Christian belief in there too, somewhere that's kind of like throwing a wrench into things, that like, well, it's God's salvific work that's like kind of the thing that's doing it all. So that might dissuade you from getting entrenched in the material, but I don't know. The way Metz puts it, I think, is far more interesting, and man, a good thing for Christians to listen to, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what's so fascinating about Metz is that in this particular case, not only is he not challenging a basic Orthodox understanding of what Christians believe about the afterlife, but he's saying if you believe that, it should make political avenues available to you, right? It should compel you to struggle now because you know what's happening in the future. And that is such a cool thing. I think for me especially, like, when you go through graduate school, sometimes you're like, I don't know, like, yeah, I guess I'm a Christian person, but like, what do I think about it? Some days maybe I feel a little more excited about all the ornaments, the kind of metaphysical stuff hanging around. And then other days it's maybe a little flatter or a little more muted. And I really appreciate people like Metz, or people like Herbert McCabe, right? These other theologians who are kind of like, Well, you don't have to like bracket off all the weird stuff. In fact, the weird stuff can really kind of energize and compel the concrete stuff, and I like that. I feel like I need that for my own spiritual sanity sometimes.
Yeah, I get it. Well, especially when it's when it's formulated in a way that is like generally good.
Yeah,
Not and not just like, I don't know, you know, because you can do the same thing, but it's just like, well, here's a bunch of like metaphysical stuff that really is actually meaningless in the end.
right,
But in
right.
this way, it actually makes a difference. Well, let me bring this into the conversation too. I think it's actually a similar kind of note, dragging out theologians here in a Pokemon battle of them. So Leonardo Boff, we talked about him, I don't know, last week, the week before, man, who knows? But anyways, he's got a blog. We love it. It's great. He's got the highest SEO rate for liberation theology, and it's fantastic. He's killing it. Anyways, he has a quote about hope that I thought was pretty interesting. It's from a pretty old post where he's kind of talking about a really particular political struggle. So we don't need to get into the weeds with like what actually is happening here, but there is a cool quote that we can kind of pull out, and I think we can get some of these similar ideas from, but maybe some related ideas as well. So the blog post is called "The Political Strength of Hope," and this is a pretty small part of it. He says, "From Saint Augustine, perhaps the greatest Christian genius." Okay, come on, probably
name
not.
one genius who's more geniuser than Augustine.
Jesus.
Oh, okay. Not a Christian.
Good point. All right. Anyways, Augustine, the greatest Christian genius, a great inventor of phrases, comes to this sentence: Hope has two beloved daughters, indignation and courage. Indignation teaches us to reject things as they are, and courage inspires us to change them. This is a bit pithy. It's definitely no Johann Baptiste Metz for sure, but I like that. I like that the word indignation is here. I think that's good.
Mhm.
You know, I think that there is this is, I don't know, maybe a weird soapbox to stand on at this part of our podcast, but like um there is such a huge like vacuum in the common vernacular of like actually describing the ways that people feel or something.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know, if something is tough, it makes you sad. If something is not going your way, it makes you angry. I don't know, we've lost a lot of vocab to describe the inner feelings that we might all have. I really appreciate the word indignation,
Mm.
because it is describing an affect that is really powerful, that I think we can learn to put a finger on maybe more than we do. Right? Like indignation isn't like hate, and it's not quite, I mean, it's anger, but it's also anger about something in particular, right? It's like not blind rage or just flying off the cuff. Indignation is like you see an injustice and you are like pissed about it.
Mhm.
But I think it's so cool that he ties that to hope. Those two ideas. I mean, you wouldn't the hope signs hanging on your in the bathroom wall of your mom's house. You wouldn't usually tie that to indignation, but like that. But that is like, you know, a related affect is such a cool observation, that you would, you know, that you actually do see injustice in the world and that you think that you could change it. And like that hope has to be a part of that equation, because if it wasn't, you wouldn't think you could change it at all. Right. And then courage follows, because like that's your, I guess, sort of ability or will to actually move to do something. So maybe not as profound as a point as Metz makes about, you know, the redemption of all things and people in history, but a good, a good observation for people, I don't know, doing the work, I suppose.
Yeah, we need a new Chugi, Walmart art,
It says get
display.
pissed.
Yeah,
Let's
get
get
pissed.
mad.
Or it's just like a family tree, and hope's up there, and then indignation and courage are down there. Yeah. But yeah, I agree, and I take that point too about like trying to expand our emotional vocabulary or the range of terms that we have to express ourselves, and see what's going on with all that. To sort of tie indignation to hope is a really empowering thing. I mean, courage is probably, I think, obvious with hope, right? Like it's a natural affinity or natural term to sort of
Mhm.
put together. Like, yeah, I have hope in something, so I act with courage, even if I, you know, if it's scary or whatever. But yeah, that piece of indignation to be like, hope can also sort of naturally inspire these feelings of not being okay with what things, how things are as they are is huge.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk more about that eschatological piece, though. Let's get real theological on this show, something we never ever do and often avoid at all costs.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, we're not doing it this time. It's Advent time. Advent time is theology time, I guess. I often think about Advent. I had to write, so G's Magazine puts out a really amazing Advent book every year, or at least they have the last few years, and I wrote for the one last year. And I remember like Lydia asked me to do it, and I was like, I guess I will, but I don't know what I'll say. I don't really write in like devotional books. That's not really my particular genre of writing. And I was thinking about it. And in that particular time, I don't remember what was going on, but I just remember being like really kind of, I don't know, ragey about like politics in that moment. And I was thinking about Advent. And it struck me, so Advent is a waiting time, and we always are, waiting for the nativity. But Advent is also, in the Christian tradition, a waiting for the second coming, for the final judgment. And I was like, you know what? That is something that I could really look forward to. Like, not because I think I'm going to come away unscathed or anything, but because it's that sort of desperation for everything to just finally get sorted out, like... I had that sort of feeling of like, I'm so upset that the world is so messed up, and like, like real people are actually dying and suffering every single day. People I know, people I don't know. And like, I just want sort of that moment where, the judge comes down and the sheep are over here, the goats are over here, and whatever else happens after that is like out of my hands. It's like up to God. And I think it's important too to kind of think of these Advent themes, both in that incarnational sense of like, we're hoping for the coming of Christ and living into that Christmas story, but also hoping for the second coming and being alive to that messianic possibility. And I think that sort of brings us into that stuff that Metz is talking about too, right? That we can sort of tie our hope to that future eschatological moment when, God will make an account for all the sufferings of all the people who have ever died and ever suffered in the world. And like, that is definitely something I think my Advent is moving more in that direction these days.
Yeah, man, Tad DeLay had a tweet earlier today. That the tweet was just, wouldn't it be great if hell existed? And speaking of identifying affect, there's a lot going on there for sure. But the general feeling is like, wouldn't it be great if that type of divine justice was real or something? And sometimes I feel that way for sure. Wouldn't it be great if really bad people got punished and you knew about it or something? But a lot going on there for sure. Anyways. I mean, the eschatological moment though of hope is such an interesting thing. Because okay, I guess in my own life, I don't know. I don't know much about theology. I'm kind of a dumbass if you didn't know. But something I don't like about theology is, and especially when it comes to like eschatological stuff, is like, it pushes everything off so far that it's like sort of meaningless, or it's meaningful only in like a really grand cosmological way. But I think there's also something too about like, okay, the second coming, but like, what if it happened in like more mundane ways or something? When I was an undergrad, I was reading a lot about like realized eschatology, which is like a particular theological movement that kind of tries to recognize, like instead of like, the Book of Revelations being about like the end times and the rapture and like a real dragon that comes to eat your butt or whatever. Like, what if that's like sort of a metaphor for things that are like already happening or whatever, like with like the Roman Empire or something.
Mhm.
But I remember reading like kind of in that realm of in that like that same like orbit of literature, some really interesting thoughts about like the second coming and like what that might mean. Like what if it means eschatologically that like the second coming is just like when Jesus comes kind of through other people or something, like I don't know, the like in the poor or in like people who are oppressed or whatever. Like what if that's the second coming? And I don't know, to me, that makes me feel a bit better about eschatology. Like there's something actually to it. Like there's some skin in the game. And not just like a big idea that you have to wait for it or for it to happen at the very end of time or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I don't blame anybody for not being able to like chew the big piece of gum that is like orthodox metaphysical claims in Christian history. Like, it's a lot to chew on, and you do not want to swallow it for sure. It'll stay in your stomach for 7 years. It's bad news. But so like all that to say, cool. I think if having like a very sort of materialist interpretation of like those themes in the Bible does it for people, I think that's great and that's awesome. But there's something about me that like I don't know. I really love like the blockbuster metaphysical claims just because they're so outrageous, right? Like the very idea of like sort of imagining that Judgment Day scenario, imagining there is a dragon that's going to eat your butt and all that kind of stuff. I really love those theologians that are able to kind of hold them at the same time. Like I think Metz is trying to do that. Another person I think of a lot is Ignacio Ellacuría, the Jesuit who was killed in El Salvador with a number of other people. He had this way of understanding the crucifixion and resurrection. I think we've talked about it even on the show, but
yeah.
I'll say it again because it's good. He has this way of understanding those things as, not the kind of like settling of metaphysical debts and like divine bank accounts of like, I don't know, how much wrath you deserve and all that kind of stuff. But instead, the crucifixion is really Christ's identification in solidarity with all who are poor and suffering and enemies of the state. And then the resurrection is also this sort of, there's a metaphysical component to it for sure. And I'm sure that Ellacuría believes that, yes, in the future, we will all be resurrected bodily and so on. But it's also for him, it's not like a passive thing that you sit around and wait for. There's a participatory moment in it. So like for him, the resurrection is happening all the time in the same way that the crucifixion is also happening all the time. So the crucifixion is not a one and done event. It happened on the cross in whatever, first century Rome. And that's the crucifixion. But the crucifixion also happens, when a person is killed or when a global South nation is held hostage by the IMF or whatever. Like these are what Ellacuría called the crucified peoples of the world. And he also had that sort of willingness to talk about the resurrections that happen all the time, right? Those moments of kind of revolution that peer through. And that's where it is for me. I love that big coming together of the biggest metaphysical claim you can think of and also the most radical materialist one.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I guess I'm not saying the big metaphysical claim is like something I'm not into or whatever. It's just like I guess I've seen I guess this must be like one of those like recovering from Christian trauma kinds of things or something, but I feel like I've seen people do so much like dumb stuff with that particular arrangement that I'm always so skeptical of it.
Yeah.
So unless it's really material, I have to be kind of like holding it at an arm's length or something. But
For sure.
yeah, I mean those formulations make a lot of sense, right? Where Jesus, like the crucifixion is something that happens again and the resurrection is something that happens again as well. Those framed in that way, I'm into it for sure.
Good. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Matt is not going to get dragged before his local bishop, and I mean, maybe not for this. Maybe for something else.
The dragon can come eat my butt at the end of time. It's fine, but like, and we have to do socialism now, though. Is the thing?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the dragon is capitalism at the same time. Yeah, it's all there. It's all metaphysical and material. All right. So we did that part. We did the metaphysical piece. We've done our theological due diligence here. Why don't we talk a little bit about the liabilities of hope? We've been really talking it up. Some of the liabilities are obvious. We mentioned them: cynicism, disappointment, naivete, or whatever. But I don't know. Like I'm sure there's a handful of people listening to this podcast, and they're like, they finally did it. They finally did the hope one, and now I'm pissed about it. I specifically know at least two people who feel that way, I'm sure, if they've gotten this far into the podcast. So let's acknowledge it. Why is hope bad, Matt? Why should we be skeptical of hope?
You should be skeptical of hope because maybe it will I mean, I don't know. it could be misleading in the sense that like you could actually change a situation, right? Like you could be too naive in your hope that you would think that you could like topple capitalism with your cool mutual aid street team or something, right? Like it's too naive, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. That is one I've heard. Another one, kind of in the same orbit of that I've heard is like, hope is dangerous because it also blinds you to the bad effects of your success. So, like, maybe you hope that you are going to win whatever it might be, some political victory, and you do win it and you get it. But, like, in the process, you sacrifice whatever, like, you sacrifice like solidarity along racial lines for solidarity along class lines or something, right? So, like, the hope can actually drive you to sort of overlook like a lot of things, and then when you finally do kind of achieve what you were after, you then you never get back to like addressing those things because the hope has been realized, and that's kind of the end of the story.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, there is an idealism to hope that I think you can. I mean, I don't know. I think it's possible to square with a materialist understanding of the world, or even just like Marxism in general. But it's something to always be kind of like watching out for, right? When you don't want to like over approximate your own sort of like your own indignation and courage or something, and think that like things are possible when they're not, or to mistake the simple like material situation for like your own indignation and courage either. There's a lot going on there, right? Like you can mistake hope does offer possibilities for mistaking causes and effects that could be kind of complicated.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or like I remember I had a conversation with somebody once and we were talking about politics, and I was like, I think they asked me the question like, where do you find hope? And I said, yeah, I find hope in a place like Cuba or Bolivia, these places where they're really experimenting with alternative ways of putting the world together. And I remember this person saying, well, isn't that a bad thing, though? Because, like, in Cuba also, like, people sometimes say that the problem of racial discrimination is gone when it isn't. Or, like, in Bolivia, they'll say, we have Evo Morales, the first indigenous president, and nevertheless, like, there are indigenous peoples who are in conflict with the state or with, mining projects happening in Bolivia and so on. And I mean, on the one hand, it's like, I think point taken. Like, I think that some left-wing people hear those critiques as like one-dimensional and just sort of undermining anything. But I think it's actually important to be alive to them and like get it. Like, if I lived in Bolivia and I was whatever, an indigenous person, and my land was being destroyed, I would probably not be too excited about that either, right? Like, that's okay to admit. And I think that it's true that like identifying your hope in a general way with a particular project can sort of blind you to the deficiencies of it. But at the same time, I think it's important to say, well, you can have a mature kind of hope that understands that there are like contradictions involved in things that you hope for.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, something maybe to consider in thinking about hope is because hope has to do with like our motivations and also um our understanding of like where we are in the particular story. There's a hermeneutic project when we're doing those types of things, right? Like hope is a type of hermeneutic when you come to read Cuba or you come to read Bolivia, because like of course of course there are bad things in those places, because I don't know, the world is a dumb place and like bad
Yeah.
things exist kind of everywhere, even if you do have like a cool political project or something. And like hope is learning to read around those things, or to like make space for them, or I mean understanding them in a mature way too. Like you can kind of just come to grapple with things and understand that it's not perfect, but still it can provide you with a sort of like a type of hope for the world, or a hope for a type of politics that you wouldn't see anywhere else. So I don't know, I mean, yeah, because there is a hermeneutic project involved, like it can break bad, and that's bad.
Mhm.
I mean, it's easy for me to say, but like, but like, of course, I don't know. To me, when someone says, "Well, oh, you think socialism is good because you are taking the very good things from this place and you're just believing them. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, of course, that's like that's like what everyone does with everything, right? Like, the sort of because we understand the world through language, you have to do a bit of that. And hope is, if hope can definitely help us read a project, but it can also make us blind to things too if we're not mature and like good understanders of things too, right? I guess that's maybe the downfall that could be involved.
Yeah. I think too, I mean, there's a lot of good critiques of hope. We mentioned a bunch of them, whatever, disappointment, cynicism, what we're just talking about, that it can sort of make you not be alive to things that you should be alive to, and so on. I think there's some other criticisms of hope, or maybe like hesitations around hope that I can appreciate, like coming from maybe out of left field a little bit. Like there's a Buddhist critique of hope that my partner Emily was telling me about recently, where some Buddhist authors don't like hope because it is tied up with attachments, and the idea is you should be constantly detaching yourselves. And when I first heard it, I was like, I don't know, like, is it so bad to have an attachment to like a good hope and so on? But like, I get it, and it's fine. Like, I'm not a Buddhist, so like, I guess I'm sort of on the fence about it, but I can understand the concern, which is you do get too attached to some vision. And if that vision doesn't come true, it will cause you suffering. And in some cases, if it does come true, it will cause you suffering, right? So, like, I think there's, like, some interesting spiritual critiques of hope as well. And, again, those kind of political ones that shine through. But nevertheless, I have to say, I think I came around to it eventually. And I think I'm also just generally a healthier person once I finally got around to being like, I'm going to hope for certain things on purpose.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a lot of stuff to hope towards.
Yeah, there are. One other thing I think that is interesting too about hope. This was just one more critical thing I had seen. I was thinking about like watching these two court cases recently, the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the
oh yeah.
Sorry, it's escaping me. The other case.
Armed robbery.
Yeah. Both the verdicts, right? And like there was a ton of rhetoric going around after the Arbery case that was like, oh, my hope is restored in the legal system after it was dashed by the Rittenhouse case. And I think that is also such a dangerous thing, right? That if your hope is so kind of wishy-washy that like it just depends on which one happened most recently, like that's no good, because both of these things are part of the legal system and they're both messed up, right? Like it's a completely bizarre situation. I mean, the legal system itself is bizarre, but to sort of hang your hope on whether or not a particular verdict restores your faith in that system, even though the system will deliver another Rittenhouse verdict tomorrow, it's important to sort of have a hope that's big enough to reject those like smaller kinds of hope, I guess. Or maybe that's one weird way of reading Paul's like hope against hope thing in the Bible, that you should have some kind of hope that is strong enough that you can hope against more like I don't know, weaker forms of hope, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I could see somebody out there hearing you say that and then hearing me say the thing like, well, bad stuff just happens, so like you should just be like mature about it and thinking that's the same thing. But it's not. It's different. It's different, right? Like you can understand like looking at like an imperfect country or an imperfect political project that is like interesting and uplifting and like provides a type of hope, and understand it in a mature way where not everything has to be perfect. But then looking at this other thing where I don't know, your hope is restored and can't you just bracket some of the bad stuff? And it's like, no. when it comes to policing or the US legal system, I think there's no hope of redemption, or maybe the only hope of a redemption is like the eschaton, right? The end of all things or something.
Right.
But, yeah. There's maybe two different things going on there.
Yeah, well, there you have it. It is Advent. We're in the middle of it. It's Hope Week. Next week is Peace Week. So you can, I don't know, start looking up all your favorite peace activists to celebrate. You can look up. I've been reading a bunch of stuff on Catholic social teaching on peace and political and social development. And I got to say, it's even better than I had thought. So I don't know, maybe we'll get around to that next week, but
maybe I'm for sure really itching actually to talk about Benjamin Lay and his pacifism. I got
Good.
the Benjamin Lay graphic novel, and
nice.
It's so good. I love it.
I'm excited for that one. Benjamin Lay, if you guys haven't heard, is a wild Quaker person in the 1700s. We did an episode with Marcus Rediker a long time ago about him, and that we'll bring that for sure. We got to bring that Benjamin Lay heat anytime we talk about peace.
Yeah, absolutely. Gotta stab something.
A fake Bible full of fake blood. That's for sure.
That's actually the opening page. Sorry, I'm not gonna talk about it anymore, but it's great.
All right, I'm gonna have to get a copy. Okay, we'll see you next week during Peace Week. What else do we have to say? Our music is by Amari Armstrong, and our outro is by the Illogical Spoon. Have a good Advent Hope weekend.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early. At least I would have